Welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Bill Plante. Let's talk about terrorism today. It's the big subject here in D.C. White House officials report that the alleged Christmas Day underwear bomber, Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab, is now cooperating with intelligence officials. The White House is pushing back hard against Republican charges that by reading Abdulmutallab his Miranda rights, the Obama administration blew the chance to get more information from him. So, what have we learned? To find out, I'm joined by CBS News national security consultant Juan Zarate and CBS News political consultant Marc Ambinder. Gentlemen, talk about how this issue has become so political in the last couple of days.
Bill, I'm actually surprised at how the tectonics on the politics of terror have shifted so quickly. But I think what the administration is doing now is clearly trying to demonstrate that the approach that they've taken in terms of using the criminal legal system and the paradigm to deal with terrorists and to deal with detainees is not detrimental to the overall mission of gathering intelligence and preventing terrorist attacks. That has been the core of the criticism from the Republicans and from others to the approach from the Obama administration. And so what you're seeing now coming out of the hearings yesterday, coming out of the White House today, are attempts to argue that we have not lost anything. In fact, we may have gained an ability to gain intelligence from Abdulmutallab, having brought his relatives from Nigeria, having built a rapport with the FBI agents. And so I think this argument is going to go on for some time because there's still going to be an issue as to whether or not we lost timely information and whether or not at the end of the day he's going to provide the kind of information that a long-term interrogation would have allowed prior to Miranda being read to him.
Well, let's just point out before we go to Marc, to our viewers, that this is now an issue because the administration normally would not have ever disclosed that the FBI had gone to Nigeria, had talked to Abdulmutallab's relatives, convinced some of them who were sympathetic to the U.S. justice system to come back and talk to him, and then say that they'd gotten information that was actionable, timely, and that disrupted other plots. You don't expect to hear that, do you, Marc Ambinder?
No, and I think this shows the political imperative that the White House faces now. I mean, their approach is not a majoritarian approach. They're fighting against public opinion because while most Americans think the administration in general is doing a good job on preventing terrorism, they disagree with the specific approaches. They believe that someone like Abdulmutallab should be treated as an enemy combatant and not as a criminal. So there's that dynamic which Republicans are seizing upon. But then there's the dynamic that they're constantly trying to struggle against, which is how do you define a national security policy and strategy that looks different enough from the Bush administration's, which is their big foil, which they're constantly using to say we're doing it differently, although sometimes they're also using to say, well, the Bush administration did it this way and so are we, so it's a little confusing, without showing to the American people or displaying any sense of them weakening their resolve. It's a very tough line to it's a very tough line or lines to color in between, but I think it just shows how poisonous the politics of this is in general and how worried they are that if they let this get away from them, it's going to hurt them in terms of constraining their ability to continue to try and close Guantanamo Bay, to try Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and other 9/11 conspirators in federal court. I mean, there's a lot of substantive policy issues that are on the line here. They're not just, engaging in an academic debate about what would have happened if.
Right. So, Juan Zarate, you were in the Bush administration, in anti-terror work on the National Security Council. What's the substantive difference, or is there any?
Well, I've argued since I left that there would likely be fundamental continuity in our counterterrorism policy, and I think largely that has been the case. I think where the White House has run into trouble and where the administration has really created sort of clouded obfuscation as to what their policies are in those areas where they've tried so hard to demonstrate that they're different from the Bush administration. And it's difficult to do, I think, when in many respects they're continuing a lot of the second-term Bush-era counterterrorism policies. I think something people need to recall, and this was something laid out in a New York Times piece by Peter Baker, is that our counterterrorism policy shifted over time, over 8 years. Grew more nuanced. We started to do things differently, and I think
in the Bush administration.
And I think part of the challenge for the Obama administration is they were campaigning against and have still dealt with a political caricature of what the Bush-era counterterrorism policies were that they inherited. And I think whether it's Guantanamo, whether it's trying to try KSM in a federal trial, whether it's defending reading Abdulmutallab his Miranda rights, all of this is being framed as in opposition to the Bush administration. And I think that has actually not served them well. And it's confused people, and it frankly doesn't bear out, especially when the administration points to things that they're doing consistently with the Bush administration.
Probably fair, though, to point out also that it's being framed in the other way by the Republicans on the Hill, notably Leader McConnell, who has made a big point of the fact that information was probably lost because Abdul Muttalib was read his Miranda rights. And a senior administration official in a very unusual briefing last night told reporters that, in fact, the suspect had been questioned under an exception before they read him his rights, and they read him his rights according to the FBI field manual, and then had a long discussion about whether he should be tried in a military or civilian court. So they're obviously trying to push back against the Republican charges from the other,
Right. And they're doing so in part by pointing to past practices. And so they'll point, obviously, to how the Bush administration treated Richard Reed. They read him Miranda rights. They tried him in court. How we dealt ultimately with Jose Padilla by reading him Miranda rights, putting him in court in Miami. And so, this is a difficult debate because the administration, in some ways, wants to have it both ways. They want to demonstrate a difference in policy, but they have to defend the strength of their actions and the fact that they're not jeopardizing intelligence or
Republicans,
other
though, Republicans are trying to essentially do the same thing, rejecting precedent, rejecting the idea that there was evolution in the Bush administration's approach, and essentially rejecting what has been since 9/11 the policy of the U.S. government, which is to try people who have attempted to commit terrorist attacks on American soil in federal court. So
I think that's right, but I think part of the problem is the confusion that's come out of the administration, where the president himself talks about the war on al-Qaeda.
Right.
But we've talked then about a different legal paradigm we will apply. For KSM and the highest-ranking al-Qaeda folks we have in detention, we're going to apply a criminal legal standard. And so there is a confusion that abounds in trying to split the baby on these issues. And I think it creates political vulnerability for the administration and also confusion for the American people.
Speaking of political vulnerability, how much is that a problem for this administration? Do people pay attention to this unless they want to argue one way or the other?
I think it could be more of a political vulnerability than it is. I mean, it is, at this point, again, when you ask people at the 30,000-foot level, do people think the Obama administration is doing a good job on terrorism? They'll say yes. I think some of that's because of the perception that, look, Obama's killing more people through the use of Predator drones than Bush did, and that fact is getting out there. People see the use of hard power. I think the decision to send more troops to Afghanistan probably shielded the administration from some criticism on the basis of that. But if it seems as if the administration is messing up and is clouding and can't get its act together when it comes to fundamental issues like trying KSM in a federal court or closing Guantanamo, I think the more of a political vulnerability it's going to be.
And very quickly, another political issue out there is where the trial of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed will be held. Obviously no longer in New York City. Any idea where they might put it?
Well, it's not clear yet. I think one of the choices is a military base that can deal with the security implications of having 5 very high-level al-Qaeda folks on trial in one place and without disrupting the neighboring community. That's difficult, though, because there's not many military bases that have those court facilities, and so there would be funding that would be necessary to construct something. Which is why the argument to allow the return of Guantanamo as a potential venue has come back on the table. There are other federal district courts that have handled terrorism cases in the past, but I think those communities would have the same concerns, I think, that New York had.
And this one now is so high profile. Well, anyway, gentlemen, thank you very much. Juan Zarate, Marc Ambinder. And finally today, the White House looked extra white this morning in yet another Washington snowfall. A little unusual around here. Our Mark Knoller took these shots for your enjoyment this morning. Take a look. Thank you very much for watching Washington Unplugged. We invite you to join us here every day at 12:30 p.m. at cbsnews.com. I'm Bill Plante. Have a great day.